All right, Heracles Saga video number 7. We have collected the golden apples of the Hesperides. We have had some significant adventures on the way back with the king of Busiris, the giant Antaeus, and with the freeing of Prometheus. And we ended the last video by saying that once Prometheus is freed, he takes the immortality from Chiron so that he can die, and Prometheus is kind of freed from his bad standing with Zeus. He's elevated to the level of a god, not just a titan. All right. And finally, the last labor of Heracles is to collect Cerberus from the underworld. And he is aided in this quest by Athena and Hermes. And he does have some, interesting things that happen during the course of this particular quest. He is able to capture Cerberus and bring him back alive, so we have another symbolic conquest of death. But while he is in the underworld, he comes across the hero Theseus. Theseus, as we'll see when we get to his saga, is being punished at this point in his story for trying to help a friend kidnap Persephone. So his friend is done for, but Theseus is just kind of stuck. So Heracles releases Theseus from his imprisonment and helps him out of the underworld. And in fact, Theseus will then, shelter or provide hospitality to Heracles in Athens. Now, also while he is in the underworld, Heracles comes across Meleager. Meleager was the host of the Caledonian boar hunt. He was also one of the Argonauts, and he is the only ghost or shade in the underworld that does not flee from Heracles. Meleager is still in his shining armor and so formidable looking that Heracles actually thinks he's still alive and reaches for his bow to defend himself. But Meleager has approached Heracles with a request. Meleager has left his sister, Deianira, unwedded in his father's house, and so he entreats Heracles to take her as his bride when he returns to the upper world. And Heracles is so moved by his story that he agrees to marry Deianira. So now that we have finished all 12 labors, we are going to move into Heracles' later life and his death. Okay, so to fulfill his promise to Meleager, Heracles does indeed go and find Deianira and offers to marry her. The thing is that he actually has a rival suitor, a river god by the name of Achilles, or Achilles, I guess is how you could say it. All right. And so he has to wrestle with Achilles in order to win Deianira's hand in marriage. Now remember, Heracles is a good wrestler, but this time he's wrestling an immortal river god. So he is able to defeat Achilles by breaking off Achilles' horn. And he gives back the horn to him, and the horn is the cornucopia. Let me find it here. There we go. Cornucopia, or the horn of plenty. You're probably familiar with the cornucopia because you see it as a prominent Thanksgiving decoration, right? The horn with all of the fruits and stuff, coming out of it. So that's the story of the cornucopia. So Heracles marries Deianira, and then this story with Nessus, the centaur, happens a little bit later. Deianira and Heracles are traveling, and they come across a river. And Nessus, the centaur, offers to carry Deianira across his back or on his back across the river, so that way she doesn't have to swim and get wet. However, when he gets about halfway across the river, he tries to rape Deianira. So Heracles rescues his wife and kills Nessus. However, Nessus is able to get one last bit, actually big bit, of revenge on Heracles. He convinces Deianira that his blood is actually a love potion that would keep Heracles from loving any other mortal woman more than she. However, his blood is actually poisonous. All right, so that's going to come back to haunt Heracles and Deianira later. And that later will happen in the form of the lovely Iole, whom Heracles falls in love with, a much younger woman than Deianira at this particular point. So Eurytus is the king of Ocalia, and he conducts an archery contest to see whose wife or concubine his daughter Iole would become. Isn't that a nice dad? Making sure his daughter can be a concubine for some woman. Anyway, Heracles wins the archery contest, but Eurytus refuses to give Heracles his prize. So, in revenge, Heracles steals Eurytus's cattle, and Iphitus, the king's son and Iole's brother, goes to Heracles to try to get them back. He's trying to negotiate with Heracles, but Hera once again steps in here, and she causes Heracles to go mad, and so Heracles throws Iphitus from the walls of the city and kills him. And so, because he has violated the guest-host relationships of hospitality, he has to leave. And so he travels to the Oracle of Delphi in order to try to get rid of the madness that Hera has inflicted him with. And so he's still crazy when he goes into the temple of Apollo at Delphi, and so he basically tries to trash the place, and so Apollo himself has to come down from Mount Olympus and wrestle with Heracles to keep him from carrying off the tripod that the priestess sits on. And so Apollo lifts his madness and comes up with this scheme to redeem himself. So once again, he has to go into servitude, and Apollo tells him that he must be sold into slavery for 1 year to do penance, and then he will be free from his madness. So Hermes himself auctions Heracles, and Queen Omphale of Lydia is the winner, and so for 1 year, he performs tasks for her in servitude. So again, we have a recurring myth of a motif of madness and servitude in the story of Heracles. So he's constantly placed in situations of inferiority and weakness, and in other instances, when his strength overtakes him and he goes mad, he has to pay for that, right? So inferiority, weakness, strength, and madness. So, he goes back once his year of servitude is done, and he's basically done his penance for killing Iphitus. He goes back and he attacks King Eurytus, kills him, and takes Iole as his prize. And that's the expedition against Ocalia. So, Sophocles, in his play, The Trachinae, details the death of Heracles. And so, when Heracles wins Iole's hand in marriage, he sends her home to meet Deianira. So Iole actually arrives before Heracles, and Deianira realizes that she is being replaced by a younger woman. And so Deianira, in her desire to keep Heracles' love, uses that supposed love potion that Nessus gave her. And so she dips a robe in Nessus's blood and gives it to Heracles, thinking that it's going to, keep his love. However, it kills him. And so Hylas is Heracles' son by Deianira. And before he dies, Heracles gets his son to promise to build him a funeral pyre and cremate him. And secondly, to marry Iole. Deianira, in her grief over killing her husband Heracles, kills herself, and Hylas will marry Iole and honor his father's wishes. So, again, the story can differ depending on the version. That Heracles dies, he's placed on his funeral pyre, his body is consumed in fire, and his soul rises to Mount Olympus, where he's given his immortality and recreated as a god. In other versions of the story, he's taken bodily from his funeral pyre, so he's never actually burned, but he still dies, and he's taken to Mount Olympus, and his body is restored, and he's given immortality and god status. All right, but remember, either way, the end result is that he becomes a god, an immortal god. All right, and I threw this little picture in here just for fun because that's the Marvel Heracles, and he's kind of a jerk in the Marvel universe, but oh well, it's a fun picture, so why not? When he is taken to Mount Olympus and becomes a god, he is finally reconciled to Hera, and Hera gives him her daughter Hebe, the former cupbearer of the gods, as his wife. And so he becomes a full-fledged god. So Ovid, the Roman poet, and Pindar, the ancient Greek poet, are our two sources for what happens to Heracles after death. All right, guys, that was a long saga. I know that usually takes several days of class to get through, so thank you for hanging in there with me and making it through this video. At least I hope you've made it through these series of videos. Your next quiz will be over the saga of the Argive saga, the myth of Perseus, and the saga of Heracles. So that will be this week. Take a look at your email to get the specifics about the quiz. It will be just like your previous quizzes in terms of, again, picking terms and characters, and then a set of short answer questions. All right. So, good night. And I'm sure you never expected Heracles to be quite this long.